Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Anthony DeStefano. And we spoke about 4 months ago about a book he had published in 2021. The title of that book is The Deadly Dawn, Vito Genovese, Mafia Boss. And I asked him back to come and talk about this story that I'm very interested in. I'm familiar with Goodfellas, but I was really interested in looking into some of the more detailed elements of the story, which he covers in this book titled The Big Heist, the real story of the Lufthansa Heist, the Mafia and Murder, originally published 2017. There's an audio book for that. Just background for Anthony. Again, Anthony M. DeStefano has been a reporter for the past 20 years for Newsday in New York City, specializing in criminal justice and legal affairs. He's the author of The Last Godfather, King of the Godfathers, Mob Killer, The War on Human Trafficking, Gangland New York, among others. He's appeared on Biography Channel programs as an expert on organized crime and also speaks at academic conferences about crime and human trafficking. As a member of the staff of Newsday, Mr. DeStefano was on the team of reporters who won the Pulitzer Prize for Spot News in 1992 for the newspaper's coverage of the Union Square subway crash that happened in 1991. So I mentioned some of the titles of his books. Another one is Top Hoodlum, Frank Costello, Prime Minister of the Mafia, 2018. Also, the most recent, prior to The Deadly Dawn, was Gotti's Boys, the Mafia crew that killed for John Gotti, who comes up in this story in a kind of secondary role. For more information about Tony's work and upcoming events, check out www.tonydestefano.com and look for his Facebook pages under Anthony M. DeStefano and the King of the Godfathers, which I'll put in the show notes. But again, today we're going to talk about this book titled, again, The Big Heist, the real story of the Lufthansa Heist, the Mafia and Murder. So Tony DeStefano, welcome back to the show.
No, thank you for having me again.
Awesome. Well, so people may not have heard our earlier show. Can you do a brief overview of some of your work? You've been in New York City. This event happened in New York City. And then what led you down the road to investigate the Lufthansa heist?
Well, in a nutshell, I was, at the time of Lufthansa, I was working with something called Fairchild, a trade publication, which, among other things, published Women's Wear Daily and some other trade magazines. We got into the mob stuff by doing a series on organized crime in the garment district, the garment business in New York City, where it had been rife for many years. And that's how we got into it. We did a quick study. We were really babes in the woods, but we had to learn pretty quickly the history of the mafia in New York City and in the garment industry. So that's how I got into it. And one thing led to another. I spent a little bit of time at the Wall Street Journal doing some organized crime reporting. But then in '86, went to Newsday, where I been ever since, and written about organized crime, legal affairs, and a host of other criminal justice related topics. That is a broad brush portrait of my career. You mentioned, I think, the previous book we talked about, The Deadly Dawn. That was about Vito Genovese, the namesake of the Genovese crime family, who was a character many people may not focus on, but I've been pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of people are buying the book because Genovese is an interesting character in his own right, a flawed character in the sense that he caused a lot of his own trouble. He got nabbed in a drug case, and that sent him to prison for the rest of his life. And he had delusions of grandeur in one sense, wanted to be like the big boss in New York, but that rubbed people the wrong way. And he didn't really play well with other children in the mob. Let's put it that way.
Right. So that's, please continue.
Yeah, that's it. For Vito.
For Vito, right. So for Vito, but this story was big news in NYC. The date that the robbery happened, December 11th, 1978. Can you kind of talk about what it was like being in the city at that time and the news surrounding the heist, and then lead into the background of what happened?
Yeah, I can. Look, the mob had a lot of tentacles in various industries in New York City. And the five families were really probably close to the peak of their power in this period. The Lucchese, the Gambino, the Bonanno, the Genovese, and the Colombo crime families, they were all really at their, I think, the peak. This is in '78, late '78. And it was through that they seemed to have control over a lot of police. There was police corruption. The mob knew its people in the police department they could work with and be sources of information. So it really was kind of a very raw time in law enforcement in the city. That's not to say, cops weren't doing their job. They were and trying to make cases. But the mob, I think at this point, was probably on its final hurrah. Let's put it that way. As we got into the 80s, things started to fall apart. But the late 70s, I think, was an interesting time for the mob because they still had a lot of power and a lot of big characters.
Right, and some of those you cover in this book, right? It's Paul Vario, Jimmy Burke. Can you talk about some of the characters surrounding the heist?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Vario was a very important captain in, I believe it was the Casey crime family. And he was a real powerful captain. And he had control over a lot of rackets, particularly at the airport. The other, under him, but not a member of the Mafia, was Jimmy Burke, who was the mythical character seen in the movie Goodfellas, played by Robert De Niro, known as Jimmy Conway. They changed the names for obviously legal reasons. Under Burke or Conway, however you want to call it, there are a lot of other subsidiary characters who played the rackets and were the tough guys. Tommy DeSimone, Joe Pesci character in the movie Goodfellas. Henry Hill came in, and you had a hierarchy from Vario on down. And Vario, of course, was a very important mafia figure in one of the 5 families in New York City. So he had a lot of clout. And he was a guy who had a lot of loyalty.
Right. So there's this group, and something happens where they get the information about this transfer of unmarked bills into JFK, right? At the Lufthansa.
That's correct. There was a guy working at the airport who tipped off a businessman in Queens who was into gambling and had a lot of gambling debts and knew a lot of the wise guys about a score, a lot of cash and jewelry. And I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. And so the businessman went to Burke and told him about this. And Burke began to put together a little syndicate of people to pull off the heist because they had inside information from the airport person about security, alarms, the safe room that the money and jewels were going to be kept in, and other things that would help make this heist work. So Burke put together the combination of people. Henry Hill really wasn't involved, even though the movie Goodfellas suggests that he may have been. He really wasn't involved in the planning of the heist and the execution of the heist. He was, some people didn't like him, they didn't trust him, so he was kept sort of on the side. But he knew what was going on. And then they pulled it off. I mean, Burke pulled together his team with DeSimone and some of the other people, as well as Frank Burke, his son. And they, and apparently Vinny Asaro, a Bonanno crime family member, and they pulled it off. And could they ever do that today? Probably not, because I think the security, one, would have been much better at the airport. We would have video cameras, license plate readers, better alarm systems, and better reaction by law enforcement. But they pulled it off. They got away with like over $5 million in cash and about $800 to $1 million in jewelry.
But it was kind of a complex system because they had to there were a lot of people working there that they had to apprehend and take hostage, right? Can you kind of talk about the mechanics of getting to the
they got to the night of the heist. They got in and they got one of the guys who was one of the workers at the Lufthansa terminal, and they basically strong-armed him and threw him in the back of the truck. So he couldn't tip off anybody that something was going on, that there was thieves outside. They got in because there was really no warning. And they got into the Lufthansa facility and really basically just overpowered everybody. They were armed. They were masked for the most part, although some of them took their masks off. And that, became interesting later on because cops were able to get some sketches of some of these heist guys, and mainly DeStefano. And they overpowered everybody, had at least one person get them to the safe room and disarm the alarm. And they got into the safe room, got the cash, opened up the plastic packages, which had about $168,000, I think, in cash within each one. And they knew they were golden. And they got the jewelry. They packed everything up. They wrapped everybody up, all the workers. They tied them up, took their licenses so that the workers knew that the gangsters knew who they were, and left. Eventually, one of the workers was able to muscle his way free of his shackles and call the Port Authority security. And after that, but then it was too late because these guys were gone. And they went out to exited the airport and got to secondary location and started divvying up the proceeds. And that's how it happened.
Right. So my understanding was is they didn't expect to have 6 million. Like they didn't expect to have that big of a haul. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. They didn't expect to have that much money. I think they thought maybe 3 million, but after they started opening these blister packs of cash, they suddenly realized, this is golden, folks. We got a lot here. And it was a lot of money. For them, it was a lot of money. Even now, it's a lot of money.
Right. I think it's like twice that amount of money taking it for taxes. I mean,
yeah.
And how did that kind of news go through the media in New York City when that happened?
Oh, it was big news. Big news. The next morning, early morning radio shows. The papers had big block type headlines on the front page about the heist, and it really was a story that just went through the city. It was so brazen. Some people really favor the gangsters in this case because they were able to pull it off. So there was more power to them, so to speak. But it really was a crime that I would say shocked. I suppose shocked, but rocketed through the city, and it did for many years.
I think it's still one of the great mob crimes. And so, what happened next after the news hit? It caused the turbulence within the group of gangsters started almost immediately, right?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was, of course, some of these gangsters took their masks off during the heist, and some of the hostages, as the airport workers, were able to provide police with descriptions so that the police artists could do sketches. So you knew basically, who you were looking for. And actually, through the mob intelligence networks and through the FBI informants, they had a pretty good sense right away that it was Jimmy Burke's crew that was involved. Not enough to make a case, but that was enough to point them in the right direction. Things started to happen because Stax Edwards, he was an African-American, I guess, musician, was working with the gang. Was supposed to get rid of the van that was used in the heist, but he didn't. Instead, he went to his girlfriend's to shack up for the night. And the van was illegally parked, and the cops ticketed it, and they found it right away because it matched descriptions. And they started dusting it for prints. So they were getting prints off the van. Stax, in the movie Goodfellas, Stax was killed. He was executed because of his screw up. But in reality, I think what happened was that he shot his mouth off some days after that at a Christmas party. And he said something about, I want some of this money that you Italian guys got from the airport. And Paul Varia was within earshot. And the story is that he said, oh, he's got to go. And Stax was summarily killed. And actually, it was the gangsters paid for Stax's funeral. they felt a little bad about it.
But some of the way, can you talk about how the money was intended to be divided up and included and sent out to the crime family and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the participants were each supposed to get a cut. How much varied between individuals. The jewelry was used as like a tribute payment for some gangsters. Story is John Gotti got some. Joe Messino of the Bonanno family got some, and some may have gone to the Colombo crime family as well. But the money was supposedly divided up, and Burke, of course, didn't do an equitable split. Some guys didn't get all their money that was due them. Some got none, and that created some resentment and rancor. And the story was that Burke kept a lion's share of the money. Others, like Vinny Asaro, got some, but Burke was supposedly the one who had most of the money. Did they ever find the money? Not to anybody's knowledge. The jewelry, that's gone, that's dissipated. That's, you'll never find that. So the money, again, has never been confiscated or recovered. It was a lot of money.
Right. And so Burke kept the money, was really paranoid about his crew, and people were talking and things.
Yeah,
it became a curse, right, for the participants.
Yeah,
people who knew.
That's true. As you saw in Goodfellas, and some instances is true. Some of these participants were spending some of their money. Others, Burke got very paranoid about, because he basically realized there were a lot of people involved and a lot more people who were potential informants or cooperating witnesses if they ever got caught. So people started to die, and they were found all over the city for many, many months. Homicide victims. And broadly speaking, what you saw in Goodfellas was true, but there was some, film license in some of the executions. But it was a curse. I mean, people got jammed up or died, and Vinny Asaro didn't die. He got some money, according to the testimony in the case, his trial, and did something with it. But it was a curse to him because he really never had. It was quoted as saying, we never really got from Jimmy Burke what we were supposed to get. And that showed that, Burke was really squandering and profiting much more than anybody else.
And so this is the guy who puts together the squad, and eventually, I think almost all of that squad ended up getting murdered, right? Except for
you can go through it. They started dying fairly soon afterwards. DeSimone got killed, but perhaps not for reasons of his involvement in the heist, but it may have been something to do with his problem killing a member of the Gambino crime family without permission some years earlier. So he had some issues. So he may have died because of other things he did. But everybody else who was dying, they pretty much, I would say about 4 or 5 murders that I can put my finger on.
Right. So Kafora and his wife, Joe Manry, Paolo Castri, Robert McMahon. Eventually, they got rubbed out. So it's really kind of like being involved in that case.
Yeah, it's like King Tut's curse.
Yeah, it was a curse. And so, you bring out that you talk about this guy, Vincent Asaro. The FBI really wants them, but they don't have enough evidence. And they never had any evidence to take anybody to trial until 2014, right?
Yeah, what happened was they did a case about Asaro. There was only one trial previously involving Lufthansa, which the low-level airport guy, who was the tipster, so to speak, was convicted.
Lewis
none
Warner,
of the other big guys.
Warner.
Yeah, Warner. And Burke wasn't charged with it. Asaro at that time wasn't charged with it. None of the other people were charged. Or they were trying to make cases. They couldn't get enough together to make a case. it was a difficult. The electronic surveillance at the time was not like you have today. It was, technically not as good. The surveillance methods were not as sharp. So it was difficult. But by 2014 or so, the FBI got Gaspar Valente, Vania Serra's cousin, as an informant. And Valente was, down on his luck, had no money, needed a grub stake. So he decided to become a cooperating witness. And his big get for the FBI was his cousin, Vania Serra, who the FBI believes, the police believe, I think the trial evidence showed, appeared to have been involved in the heist.
But he was acquitted too.
He was acquitted. They went to trial in 2015, and they resurrected the old Lufthansa case, and everybody said, oh my God, after all these years, we're going to have a trial. Most people thought they had a pretty good case, because they had tapes that sort of suggested that Serra knew and participated. They had Valente's testimony. They had some collateral testimony, but the case didn't gel. I think part of the reason was because Serra now was the eldest statesman. He was about close to 80 years old. And he was in the courtroom just by himself. There was nobody else charged in his indictment. Nobody else went to trial. And nobody else was accused of Lufthansa. So the jury, I think, looked at him and said, this is this one guy, and we're going to hang everything on him. And I think that played into it. I think the fact that maybe they didn't like the fact that his cousin was informing on him in such a mercenary way, I think may have grated against the jury. And I think the defense did a good job of creating reasonable doubt about some of the. And I also think, and hadn't been brought out much before, but it's in the book, they kept unrelated charges in there, trying to show that Serra was a big gangster. At one time he was, but he really was down on his luck. And a lot of that stuff just really didn't make any sense in putting this case together for trial. So in the end, what happened? Serra got acquitted. And he walked out of the court. I remember that day very distinctly, because everybody was expecting a guilty finding. But I said to myself, there's a little window that Serra could wiggle through in terms of the proof in this case. And of course, he's denied ever having any participation in the heist, and denied testimony against him. And he got acquitted. And he walked out of the courtroom the happiest man in the world. He'd been in jail for about 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
what kind of evidence did they bring up in that 2014 case? New evidence.
Well, they had Gaspar Valente tapes of Serra, in which Serra suggested that he knew about the heist and complained about not getting his cut. And that's and the tapes and Valente's realization or recollections of what was going on at the time. Those were the main bits of evidence. But like I said, it wasn't enough.
What happened to Jimmy Burke over that time? Like, he ended up going to jail, but not for the Lufthansa, right?
Yeah, Jimmy Burke went to jail on a couple of other things. One was a homicide case of they killed a drug dealer, and another was in the Boston College basketball fixing case. And he didn't get as much time as a homicide, which sent him to state prison for life, but he never got convicted of any involvement in Lufthansa, Jimmy Burke. And he died in prison. I think it was 1996, if I'm correct.
How many people did they tie to him who got killed? I mean, he was basically a serial killer, right?
Of sorts. I would say a good half dozen.
Yeah. It's incredible. And what happened kind of as far as like Samantha's asking, did Jimmy keep all the money for himself?
No, he didn't keep all the money. He kept a large portion of it. Testimony at Assaro's trial showed that Assaro got some. Some of the other people got some. I think Valente kept some in his house. He didn't get a hell of a lot. And the jewelry, of course, went to as tribute to various other crime families, bosses and captains, Gotti and Messino, and I think some of the Colombo crime family too.
So it was almost kind of like worth all the crime families' while to make sure a lot of the actual burglars or gangsters got whacked, right? Because then nothing would lead back to them.
Well, certainly from Burke's point of view, I think he was paranoid and realized that he has to cut ties with anybody connected to the heist that he was not confident about. So people started to die, and that shows you, there's really no honor among thieves. Certainly no protection of life.
And then Paul Katz, what was his involvement? There was like a more recent within the last 10 years, they were looking for his body too, right?
Oh, Paul Katz's body. Paul Katz was a sort of hanger-on, a trucker who was like a hanger-on and part-time hijacker for Burke and his crew. The Burke got very skittish about Katz and believed that Katz was going to, and may in fact already have been, an informant for the police. So they killed Katz. The testimony was that he was strangled. And then the testimony at Assaro's trial was that Katz was buried in the basement of a home of a relative in Queens, basement of a home of a relative of Assaro in Queens, sort of the Ozone Park area, and in the concrete for many years, until Burke got worried that they might find that body. So he had a couple of his people, including Vinny Assaro's son, dig it up and take the remains upstate or in some other place for disposal. The thing was, they didn't clean out the burial pit totally. And the FBI, when it learned from Valente about the burial, dug it up and they found bones. And a forensic anthropologist from the New York City Medical Examiner not only identified them as human, but through DNA analysis, they identified him as being that of Paul Katz. So that ratified or corroborated some of Valente's testimony, which made him appear, as a valuable witness. So they found Paul Katz's remains, some of them anyway, and they gave it back to his family. And the family, I think, took care of it, did a burial.
And then kind of the story that's in Godfather is Henry Hill at some point flipped, right, and went into the witness protection program, testified against Burke and Paul Vario, right?
What happened was Henry Hill got jammed up on a Long Island drug case, and it was public at that point. And that was against the long time stricture of the mob that you don't get involved in drugs. Now that was a fiction, because I think everybody knows that the mob for many decades was involved in drugs, narcotics, off the books, sort of unofficially. But in any case, Henry Hill got arrested on a drug case, and that soured his relationship with not only Paul Vario, but also with Jimmy Burke, who realized that, hey, Henry Hill is got a serious case against him. Is he going to flip? And Burke well, this is Henry Hill's supposition that Burke was going to have him killed. Somebody was going to have him killed. So he decided to become a state's witness for the FBI. He gave him some stuff on Lufthansa. Like I said, he really didn't have that much inside information about Lufthansa and how it went down and the planning. But he had a lot of middle information. He had information about the Boston College basketball case and other crimes. There were other crimes he was involved in. So he was able to become an effective witness in some ways, ineffective in some cases. But still.
Is it true that Hill and Burke could not be made members because they weren't 100% Italian?
That's true, yeah. The stricture, the rule in the Mafia is that you have to have, I think your mother has to be Italian
It's matrimonial.
to become a member. So they were Irish. And if I have this right, they were ethnically excluded. They could be associates and very good ones, but they couldn't be in the mob.
Right. And the story that I found that was interesting. So the story about Spider that's in Goodfellas is a true story involving Tommy DeSimone, right?
Yeah, he did shoot and kill somebody in the basement of the club. And the story was that they buried this guy in the club, in the basement, on the floor. Well, years later, the FBI, acting on tips, went in and dug up the floor. And the only bones they found were those of a cow, because that area of Brooklyn and sort of bordering Queens was at one point farmland. So you dig down deep enough, you don't know what you're going to find. They didn't find any human remains.
It's just so many murders were surrounding these guys. It really is incredible.
Yeah, I know. Well, this is the period of the mob where murders were happening a lot. The murders happened in the mob, for decades, up until probably about the late 1990s. They started to taper off at that point. But 70s, 80s, 60s, a lot of people were getting killed.
It's just incredible.
Sometimes for very trivial reasons,
Right. I mean, it just seems like some of these guys, they just all ended a terrible demise. Like even Burke ended up in jail, but every other one of them got killed for one reason or another. Murdered after robbing a dismemberment, like really horrible stuff.
Yeah, dismemberment was something that went
Teresa
on.
Ferraro.
Yeah, Teresa Ferraro, I believe a girlfriend of DeSimone at one point. There was suspicion that she was becoming a cooperating witness. So she left her beauty salon or whatever, and I think it was in Queens or Brooklyn, and was never seen again until her body parts washed up off the Jersey coast. Pretty lady, played with the mob, and that's what happens. These women, not all of them, but some of them get tied in with these guys. And interesting, exciting life, a lot of money, a lot of glamour, a lot of respect on the street. But in the end, you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're dead.
It's a great
She's
point.
not the only woman who died.
Right. In this case, or this situation, was Teresa Ferrara, Joanna Lombardo, and Joanna Cofora, all with their husbands and or boyfriends, and then they ended up in the worst.
That's right. Yeah.
Circumstances. Yeah.
So I mean, that's a lesson, right?
Yeah, it's dangerous. I know we were talking in the pre-show. This reminds me of, I was watching a documentary about the bank break-in at the Federal Bank in Brazil, and these guys got 161 million reals, like a huge amount of money, but it just ended up as a curse. And when one of the head leaders got arrested by the cops, he's like, "Thank God this is over. Put me in jail. I do not want to be out here. Everybody knows I have this money. My family members are getting abducted. My friends are getting killed." It created so much jealousy and greed and lust and all that stuff. And and they're just like this case. There are tons of dead bodies, tons of missing people in this Brazil case. And what were the consequences? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the story and all this mob stuff. These guys, they do these big crimes. They don't involve just one person. They involve a whole bunch of conspirators and Confederates. And at some point, everybody's going to look at everybody else and say, "Oh, is he going to flip, or should I take care of him?" Joe Messina was famous for that. A lot of people died, were connected to him. So yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be a life of loyalty, but it really, in the end, isn't.
Right. It's like the whole the surface. It's honor, respect, but everybody in the real world, man, early ends. Some of these bodies are never found. It's really incredible.
That's true.
Yeah. Tony, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap this up?
Well, I mean, the Lufthansa case, the Lufthansa heist, is one that's firmly embedded in our, popular culture. You have the movie Goodfellas, Nick Pileggi's book Wise Guys, is framed around it in part. And it really is, I think, emblematic of a time when the mob was in its final heyday. They pulled it off. They pulled it off because I think law enforcement, to some extent, wasn't able to cope with this kind of thing. It was a brazen plan, and they had it together enough that they were able to pull it off. I don't think they could do this today. I'm not saying there couldn't be a ripoff through other methods at the airport or any other place. But I think it would be done differently. I think probably it would be done with paper transactions, fraud, something that doesn't take such a big strong arm, tactic. But then again, today in New York City and other places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, talk about strong arm tactics. You have these smash and grab robberies, sometimes taking significant amounts of jewelry and items from stores. So, I can't say that this strong arm stuff is passe, but certainly I think for the old gangsters, I think you're not going to see this.
This is an age, time stamped in an age. And where's the best place to get the book? I know it's on Amazon. You have an audio book of this as well. There's a lot more details.
Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. Some bookstores will have it. They can get it for you. It's out there, so you can get it. It's still current.
Yeah, and there's a lot more details about this whole story that you have outside of the film. There's a lot more things going on under the surface. And the best place to reach you, Tony, is at your website, TonyDeStefano.com, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, Tony DeStefano, last name, .com. And that's the best way. So I'm on Facebook also, as you said, is either Anthony M. DeStefano or Tony DeStefano. Either one will work.
And I will put those links into the show notes. So if people have follow-up questions, please reach out to Tony. And again, the title of the book that we talked about today is The Big Heist, the real story of the Lufthansa Heist, the Mafia, and Murder, originally published 2017 by Tony DeStefano. Thanks so much for your time, Tony.
No, thank you.
All right, take care. Stay there.